happy when it rains. I feel good when things are going wrong. I only listen to the sad, sad songs. I'm only happy when it rains.
One of Garbage's biggest hits, released back in 1995 and 30 years on, Let All That We Imagine Be the Light, is the 8th studio album from influential alternative rock band. Released next week, the band cites this latest record's inspiration to be found in the search for an uplifting thread against a swell of chaos and extraordinary upheaval in the world today.
If you're ready for love, 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 if you're ready for love.
The band's centrifugal force, Shirley Manson, has suffered ill health and 2 hip replacements, resulting in cancelled gigs, but is now on top form again. She spoke to me earlier and I asked whether the sound of this album was in deliberate contrast to the mood of the band's previous record.
Absolutely. I mean, I felt it was imperative to adopt a more hopeful perspective on this record. You know, the last record, my words on the last record, No Gods, No Masters, which came out about 5 years ago, were full of outrage and concern for the future. And I realised I couldn't afford to adopt that kind of aggressive, outraged, political stance this time round, because here we are, we found ourselves 5 years down the road and all the things I was scared were going to happen have happened. And now nobody needs any more pessimism. Nobody needs any more hopelessness. Nobody needs any more, naysaying. We've got to hold each other's hands and really muster our forces of positivity and light and love. It's as cliched and hokey and corny as it sounds. I really believe that is the only way we're going to turn this awful situation around.
I'm going to go on to address some of the things, the troubling things, obviously George Floyd and so forth later in the interview, but due to physical accidents and operations, you wrote the album remotely from your longtime band, and I wonder if that element of being cut off was actually good, because you could just focus hard, and also some of it was in your own bedroom. They sent you the instrumental parts, but then it was up to you to put yourself into the album.
Exactly. A lot of the time when you're working together as a band, you can often find yourself being really aware of everybody else and what they're maybe hoping you're going to do as their lead singer. You feel like in some ways sometimes you're performing for their, not appetite or their sensibility necessarily, but you want them to feel engaged and feel like you're representing them. And in this case, because we were all recording remotely from one another, I had no such expectations that weighed on me. Instead, I felt very free to just express myself without judgment and then offer it up to them as a gift, the way they had offered the music up to me as a gift. And so it was a very different way for us to work after 30 years of being in a band. And it was actually an extraordinary experience, although not one I would like to repeat.
But it was freeing.
Very freeing, but tough. And lonely. It's lonely.
I mean, it's interesting because you talk, you've never made any secrets of the fact you've had bouts of depression, but what I think is so interesting you say about yourself is that you have a healthy psyche.
I think I've got a pretty healthy psyche. My husband might disagree at times, but I'm robust. I've managed to negotiate a career as a woman, as an aging woman, in an industry that's really cruel to women. I've survived, and I think part of that is because I have managed to harness my strengths and to keep all the noise in my brain at bay enough to keep being able to turn up for interviews, keep being able to turn up to the studio and perform live, and here we are. I
mean, you've talked about being blinded by the dazzle of your career. In a sense, this is a retort to everything you've faced in the music industry, you would say, but give me an example of where you felt you were given a sleight of hand or that you were not treated well.
Well, I will address one of the songs on the record, which is Chinese Firehorse, which was a true story about being on a press junket, talking to 2 different journalists on day one of supporting our new record, a male Irish journalist and a female German journalist, both separately suggested to me that I should be considering retirement. And I was 54, maybe 53 even. And I realised, thank God, I had the clarity of mind to realise they would not be suggesting this to me if I was male. It was a real sexist, misogynistic approach to a woman who was on day one of her promo of a brand new record, her 7th studio record, that was being supported by a major record label. Clearly my career was full of agency, and yet they felt the need to try to diminish, I guess, my agency, and I was offended by it.
Yeah. And, you know, if you want to just read the roll call, Patti Smith, Debbie Harry, Annie Lennox, Madonna, you know, they're still performing. But I wonder if anyone asked Jagger or Bob Dylan or Paul McCartney why they're still performing.
I don't think they would dare. But to be fair to the world at large, you know, you mention all these female artists who are now performing in their 70s and 80s. That's the first time, literally, in the history of humankind, we have seen women holding on to their careers in these late decades when women have historically been put out to pasture. So that's the first wave we're seeing now of these amazing women who are telling us all that you have agency beyond your 20s and 30s.
You say my time is over, that I have gotten old, that I no longer do it for you, and my face now leaves you cold. You say I'm looking heavy, and I have lost my mind, that I should do the right thing by everybody, and I should just retire.
I mean, what is the sound of this album? It seems to have everything for me. It's cinematic, there's a lot of electronic, there's synth. What's the atmosphere of the album?
Well, I've heard it described to me as dystopian, which I love, because I feel that in some ways it absolutely is where I found myself. It felt I was living in a dystopian world. I was horrified by what I was seeing, you know, even with the Biden administration, you know, and then the second Trump administration, both terrified me. I felt like we were watching our world as we know it crumble. And no new ideas, you know, no reimagining of how we can live in a planet that is under duress, you know. There was complete ignoring of climate change, a refusal really to reimagine the working hours and the new demands of a modern life.
And an ageing population.
And an ageing
Where
population.
the demographics are going to control everything. But let's talk about the opening track, There Is No Future in Optimism. That was inspired in part by George Floyd's violent death. Tell me about where you were and what you witnessed.
Well, I was in Los Angeles and it was during lockdown, so I was unable to get home to visit my family, which made me insane. I mean, I had never felt that feeling of entrapment before in my life. And I live in Hollywood, and that was the place where a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests were taking place right after this horrendous video that we all watched on our telephones of this poor man being crushed to death at the knee of a white supremacist racist cop. And if it hadn't been for the fact that a very brave, courageous young black teenager had filmed it, he would have gotten off with murdering this man in cold blood. Until last year, it was the worst thing I'd ever seen in my life. And it sickened me and terrified me. And it set me on a whole course of trying to learn about colonialism, racism, white supremacy, and that determination to educate myself about that changed my whole view of life. And it was a very important moment in my life that has stuck with me. And so when I heard the music that the band had sent me, and they titled it There's No Future in Optimism, and I was in polar opposition to that sort of philosophy in a way. The song is an argument against allowing pessimism to engulf you. Instead, it was sort of like a Bonnie and Clyde sort of run for freedom, taking into account all the horrors of the world and realising that I had to employ the great power of love into my world, into my life in a way to control very slightly the world I was finding myself in, which seemed to me full of hate and destruction and chaos. And I was like, I reject that. I am going to literally run towards the light, run towards hope, run towards love. It's a story of a couple that run from the horror and the terror and into a future full of love and hope.
The night is dark and full of terror. The air is thick with helicopters. People marching, cops are swarming. The city's on fire and the sirens are screaming. You and I, we have a chance. We could leave this place and rewrite our romance. Let's go down.
You just said something there about until last year it was the worst thing you'd ever seen. What happened last year?
Well, just to see the horrendous assault by Hamas on, Israeli teenagers, but then the ensuing punishment that is still going on a year and 8 months later. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I've never seen so much suffering and so much polarized intolerance that has blinded us to the basic morality of a horrendous situation that has to be resolved, and watching our governments just throw up their hands basically and do nothing about it has shaken me to the core. That up until that moment, I had not seen anything as horrendous as the murder of George Floyd.
You have a song, The Day I Met God. It's got incredible horns and strings, and your voice is just, it's beautiful on it. It's interesting, of course, because you grew up in a very religious family, but you're not religious.
Well, I don't know if I'm religious or not. I think I'm struggling still to come to terms with what I believe in, which of course is what this song is about, right? And at the very, very end, I say I was high on tramadol and painkillers. And so was this moment of realization about what I do believe in? Because, when I hit upon that chorus it shocked me when I came up with it. I was like, this actually is my faith. I do believe this is my faith. And so it is me still wrestling with what I believe and what I don't believe. It's me wrestling with my mortality. I'm nearly 60 next year. I have come out of 2 hip replacements. For the first time in my life, I was broken physically, and I really had to start asking myself some really serious questions. And so this is just the beginning, I think, for me of figuring out what I really believe.
In the middle of the day when I met God, my life fell apart. I met God. In the middle of the noise and the chaos, in the middle of the street, I couldn't speak. I couldn't speak.
I mean, you have lived in the US longer than you've lived in Scotland, and I wonder where your heart is now.
My heart is everywhere. As a musician, you're in an incredibly privileged position of going all over the world and being met with love. And so everywhere I go, I feel I'm at home, because there are people there that understand me often better than my friends or my family members. So I don't see the world in the same way necessarily that people who don't get to travel as much as I do.
You've collaborated with Paul Buchanan from the Blue Nile. You admire David Byrne, Ray Davis. Anyone that you like to sing with now?
Well, I keep saying to my tour manager, because he also tour manages Brian Ferry, I keep saying, does Brian not want to sing a duet with me?
Oh, I'm sure he would. He sings with lots of people.
And my tour manager is always like, I don't know about that, but I would have loved to have done a duet with him. There's a lot of people, actually, that I would love to sing with, but I can't afford to think like that, because otherwise I'll just live in permanent disappointment. I just have to think about what I've got.
How can you be permanently disappointed? You've sold well over 20 million albums. You don't need to prove yourself.
No, I have to say it's such a lovely feeling to be in the 3rd decade of this band and be aware that nobody's going to take that away from me now. Whereas, in the earlier stages of my career, and I'm sure you can relate to this as a broadcaster and journalist, you think this is going to come to an end, it's not going to last. And then realising, oh my God, we've now been doing this for 30 years. And everywhere we go, we have some fans, and it's an insane privilege and one I never thought I would enjoy.
I've got this big list of your US tour in front of me, which looks to me punishing. Except when you get to Saratoga, California, the Mountain Winery. That sounds good. But I don't see any UK dates on this.
No, there's no European dates actually. We played Europe last summer and it was a very costly endeavour. The costs of touring have now tripled. The fees remain basically the same as we were paid in the 90s. And it's very hard to actually make a tour profitable at this point. And so we will not be coming back this year, unfortunately, because, of course, I always think of Europe as my home in many, many ways. But that's life, we'll see what happens.
You say that at the moment, after every gig in the tour, I say farewell to the city because who knows when I'll be back. But you will be back.
Yeah, although, time is running out on Garbage because my band are much older than I am. And having gone through all that physical trauma that I have just emerged from, a few months ago, I'm aware that, time is not on our side, age is not on our side, vigour is not on our side. I have plenty of vigour, but, I don't know how long this will last. And I don't want to catch myself in a position where I have not employed my gratitude for every single show we play. And I do think, will I be back? We've just come back from South America. It was an extraordinary tour. But I'm like, will I ever get to play in Chile again? Will I visit Peru? I don't know. I hope so. I am aware that life is chaotic and crazy and you just cannot afford to take it for granted.
The indomitable Shirley Manson there. Let All That We Imagine Be the Light is out next week. And let's hope in that optimistic spirit of that album that Garbage will be back in the UK again soon. And Brian Ferry, I hope you're listening.